very much. Now, I will try to introduce our speaker, Dr. Sumanto Chakraborty, very briefly. So, he did his graduation from Presidency College in 2011. He did his post-graduation from University of Calcutta in 2013. He have completed his PhD from Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics, in short form we know IUCA, in 2017. Then he was a research associate and national postdoctoral fellow at Indian Association of Cultivation of Science. Then he moved to Max Planck Institute for Gravitational Physics, where he was a visiting fellow. He joined ISCS in 2019. He was very young, and within this short time, he have received a number of awards. I won't mention all of them, but a few of them are like he received Satyendranath Bose Memorial Award in 2014, V.V. Narlikar Best Thesis Award in 2017, N.R. Sen Young Researcher Award are a few of them. So now with this brief introduction, now I request Dr. Sumanto Chakraborty to deliver Debojyoti Bhomik Memorial Lecture.
Thank you very much, Professor Sagor Bishwas, and thanks to Swami Ekochittananda, Principal of Vidya Mandir, and Professor Deepak Ghosh, who gave a very nice introduction to the memorial, to the person to which the lecture is dedicated to. So I will start by presenting my lecture, and I hope that will be fine with all of you. So I will just share my screen, and I hope it is visible. So I guess all of you can see the screen of my presentation. Okay, hopefully everything can be seen. So the
yes, we can see.
Okay, thanks. So I've divided the talk into 3 or 4 parts, and I will sort of go through it very slowly so that all the students can comprehend it to some extent. So the first few parts would be very basic, and I hope all the students who are mostly from the BSc background in physics will be able to understand it fully. At the last 3 or 4 slides, I may become slightly technical, but hopefully things will go well even then. So let us start with one of the picture that I always prefer, which is the cube of physics. So what I have plotted here, so there are 3 axes. I think you can see my cursor over here. One is the Newton's constant g, the other axis is the speed of light or inverse of it, and the other axis is the Planck's constant h bar. So effectively these 3 are the 3 most important constants that we encounter in our everyday discussions in physics. And at various vertices along this axis, there are various theories that we either know very well or we are learning about them, or there are also theories which we do not know anything about. So for example, there is the Newtonian gravity on the topmost level. So Newtonian gravity comes when there is no effect of speed of light or neither there is any effect of h bar. So you get Newtonian gravity where g plays the central role of the theory. Then we of course have Newtonian classical mechanics where there is no speed of light, neither h bar nor Newton's constant. Of course, we also have special relativity when we introduce speed of light, but there is no gravity, no quantum physics. If we have no g or c, but we only have h bar, Planck's constant, then we get back to quantum mechanics, and so on and so forth. For today's talk, I will sort of concentrate on this corner of this particular cube, where the Newton's constant and the speed of light will play a crucial role. And this particular corner is where general relativity sits in, and I will discuss in some detail how this theory can come about. And as I said, classical mechanics or Newtonian gravity, these are sort of well-known aspects of physics that we learn in our BSc days. General relativity is sort of advanced because we learn them in our master's course. But at the same time, there are several features of general relativity which people are still exploring. So this is like a developing field in some sense. And then there is this particular corner where all the three constants will play vital role, namely the gravitational constant, the speed of light, along with the Planck's constant. And this is where the theory of everything lies, or in other words, the quantum gravity lies there. And we have absolutely no idea about that particular theory, and we hope that either understanding of general relativity or the other end, which I don't think you can see, which is the quantum field theory, this will probably shed some light on an understanding of the quantum theory of gravity. So this is something I will try to elaborate on in the last 3 or 4 slides of my talk. Let us now talk about the forces around us. As I said, first 3 or 4 slides will be pretty much general physics so that all of you can understand the context of this talk. So therefore, from the previous slide, we understood that what are the constants of our nature that are responsible for our understanding of our universe. So let us now try to see where these constants came from and what are the forces that actually guide us to the understanding of our universe. The first 2 forces are something you are always familiar with, namely electromagnetism and gravity. So electromagnetism is at work, and that is precisely because you can see my screen. My screen is working, my laptop is running, all due to some forms of the electromagnetic force. At the same time, when you throw a ball or when an apple falls from a tree, all of these are due to the gravity. And you may have heard about a mission of NASA to the Mars, and that is also due to, the gravity will play the dominant role on that mission. Then there are weak forces and strong forces. These forces are not something that you would see in everyday life, but still they are very important, because when you are considering atoms or stability of atoms, then there are nucleus inside that atom, and that nucleus mostly consists of protons and neutrons. Now the protons are all positively charged, and we know that 2 positive charges repel each other. Therefore, it is very difficult to have all those positive charges combined and kept at such a small location as that of a nucleus. So in order to achieve that, there has to be some force other than electromagnetism, and that is what is referred to as the strong force. Similarly, there is a phenomena called radioactivity, where a particular material decays into other materials and it emits various particles. And that particular phenomena is governed by the weak force. So both weak and strong force are nuclear or atomic level forces, and they do not affect our everyday life because we normally do not probe such length scales. On the other hand, as I said, electromagnetism and gravity are the 2 most dominant forces that we sort of see in our everyday life. But among them, gravity is much more weaker than electromagnetism. How to see that? Suppose you have 2 electrons and you want to compute the electromagnetic force between the electron and the gravitational force between the electron. So this is effectively the charge by mass ratio of electron to the power 2. Now charge of an electron is of the order of 10 to the minus 19 coulomb, and the mass of electron is 10 to the minus 31 kg. So if you do the ratio, you will get a factor which is like 10 to the minus 24. So that means the gravitational force between 2 electrons is 10 to the 24 times weaker than the electromagnetic force between them. That is why gravity is the weakest among all the forces, and that leads to the reason that it is the difficult quantity to understand. So when does it become strong? So it becomes strong when none of the other forces are present. So for example, if we consider the motion of moon around the earth or motion of earth around the sun, in none of the cases electromagnetism, weak or strong force, play any role. That is because weak and strong force, as we just understood, are working at a nuclear or subnuclear level, while electromagnetism is working at a larger length scale. But since charges are always neutralized, the total number of positive and negative charges are mostly identical. That is why macroscopic objects are always charge neutral, and there is no electromagnetic force between such objects. And therefore, the only force which is responsible for all this physics is gravitational force. Now, if we want to understand something, we have to understand when that force is at its strongest and where it becomes strong. it becomes strong for black holes. So I will come back to the notion of black holes at a later slide. But at the moment being, let us try to understand that the force becomes strongest for some object which I am calling as black holes, and therefore there must be non-trivial physics happening at that level. And similarly, in physics, theory and experiments, they always go hand in hand. So if you only do theoretical advancements with very little advancement in experiment, that particular theory is supposed to fail, because there has to be experimental verification for a theory to make sense. Similarly, for the case of gravity as well, I will discuss about two of the most recent observations, namely black hole shadow and gravitational waves, which have put this particular theory of black holes and the associated non-trivial physics of it to a firmer ground. Finally, let us discuss two of the most fundamental principles in physics, because this is what sort of shapes the current and modern understanding of physics as we see it nowadays. So these two laws, or these two fundamental principles can be slightly different from person to person. Like someone can say that the second one in the list is actually my first, but it really does not matter. So the first principle is the action principle, which I think people in the third year of BSc will understand from the Lagrangian mechanics computation. So it says that the classical motion of any particle or field or whatever, it always extremizes the action. So people do not know why it happens, but it seems to work in all the cases. And second property is that if you have a symmetry in a system, there is always a conserved quantity. And we all know that conserved quantities are extremely useful because they lead us to a simplification of the problem. For example, when you work with central forces, there are two symmetries. One is time translation invariance, and the other one is rotational invariance. The time translation invariance leads to conservation of energy, and the invariance under rotation leads to conservation of angular momentum. And we know that the conservation of energy and the conservation of angular momentum are both essential in order to reduce the central force problem to a single one-dimensional differential equation, which we can eventually solve if the potential is simple enough. So therefore, symmetry plays a very crucial role in solving and simplifying systems which can at first glance look complicated. So as I said, these two principles you will encounter many times in your future research. And I hope that, it's a good time to know that these two principles are what holds most of the physical laws. So all the laws of physics, including the gravitational law, electromagnetism, or all the other things that you can think about, can actually be derived by using these two principles accurately or appropriately. Even though in the quantum world things are slightly different, but there also you can cook up a very similar principle known as the path integral formulation, which will help you to use the action in order to assess the probabilities in a quantum system. But let us not get into that. So therefore, I have given you a broad idea about where we are currently lying. We have some places in our life in physics which we know pretty well. There are some areas which we do not understand very well, but we do understand them to a good extent. And again, there are certain areas which we do not understand at all. And the job would be to understand these unknown territories by using whatever we know about the known physics. And for that, we have to use these principles, which are fundamental principles, and we have to use and we have to learn about all the forces that we see around us in the nature. As I said, among these forces, gravity is the weakest force and therefore is the most difficult one to understand, and it becomes strongest in the case of black holes. So given all this, we'll try to understand the physics of the black holes in this particular topic. But before we go to that, let us also remember the people who actually made all of this possible. So I will talk about three of them, and you know about all of them. So the first person is Galileo Galilei, and he is referred to as the father of modern science. And he actually overturned thousands of years of knowledge from Aristotle and other great people at that time who said that Earth is actually at the center and Sun is revolving around it. So Galileo questioned that and he faced severe consequences of the same. But nonetheless, even without that, he made several monumental discoveries. For example, we use the words velocity, acceleration repeatedly in our physics discussion of mechanical systems. And these ideas were actually first pointed out by Galileo and constructed by him. Second, we also use the relativity principle that two objects are in relative motion, what happens to the position, what happens to the time, and so on and so forth. Such a relativity principle was also proposed by Galileo. The next and the most important thing is the equivalence of inertial and gravitational mass. And this is very much tied up with the Pisa's famous experiment, where Galileo sort of dropped two objects of different masses, but they hit the floor at the same time. Even though there are controversies whether Galileo actually performed that experiment or not, but that has become a monumental test in the sense that that is the first time someone was trying to do some experiment to prove some theoretical results. Similarly, on the front of astronomy also, Galileo discovered the telescope. Even though it's not strictly true in the sense there is someone in the Netherlands who discovered the telescope a year before him, but the modern form of the telescope, at least the refractive telescope that we know of, was coming from the Galileo's hand. And he could make it so good that he could achieve a magnification of 3 times magnification at that particular time, which was not an easy task to do. And using his telescope, he actually noted the sunspots, various phases of Venus, the satellites of Jupiter, and the rings of Saturn with his own handmade telescope. So he made seminal contribution. And based on that, I want to show you a video where this particular principle of Galileo, that two objects will drop at the same time, was tested on the surface of the moon. Because often if you drop a hammer and a feather, they will not reach the surface of the earth at the same time. This is because due to the air resistance, the feather experience in comparison to the hammer. But on moon, since there is no atmosphere, these two should drop at the same time. And this is what this particular video should show you.
Well, in my left hand, I have a feather. In my right hand, a hammer. And I guess one of the reasons we got here today was because of a gentleman named Galileo a long time ago, who made a rather significant discovery about falling objects in gravity fields. And we thought that where would be a better place to confirm his findings than on the moon. And so we thought we'd try it here for you. The feather happens to be appropriately a falcon feather for our falcon. And I'll drop the two of them here, and hopefully they'll hit the ground at the same time. How about that? Mr. Galileo.
So I hope, as you could see here, that the astronaut is dropping a hammer and a feather simultaneously on the surface of the moon, and they reach the surface of the moon at the same time, confirming what Galileo said in 1600. So this is a very nice test, and you can find this video on Wikipedia or YouTube because it's a freely available video. And you can see that this particular equivalence of inertial and gravitational mass and the time and the particular result, that whatever be the mass of the object, it has to drop to the surface at the same time, can be tested on the surface of the moon so accurate. Now the next experiment or the next person of concern is Isaac Newton, whom all of you again have heard about. And Isaac Newton also made seminal contributions in several areas of physics, including in mathematics, because he claimed that he had invented calculus, even though there is a fight or doubt between that, because along with Newton, there is another person from mathematics who actually claimed that he also invented calculus. And it was not very clear who did it for the first time, and there was a huge controversy over this particular fact that who really invented calculus. But modulo that, whatever Newton did, he actually gave calculus a very nice form, even though that may not be the modern form, which was actually done by Leibniz. But still, he had important contributions in this particular branch of mathematics. And how he invented calculus in mathematics? Because he was trying to solve the inverse square law force of gravitation. That is the trajectory of a particle in a gravitational field. And that can be most easily done using the calculus. So that is what led him to invent or understand the differential calculus. But I mean, as you know, there are controversies over it. Modulo that, he had made several other contributions. As I said, the inverse square law for gravitation would rank the top of it, because until Einstein came along, this is the law for gravitation that everyone had been using, and it predicted very natural things, and all of it could be verified by experiment. Like the Kepler's laws, which we knew earlier, but we did not know how to derive the Kepler's law. Like the t square proportional to r cube law, for example. So that law, Newton could derive using his inverse square law force, and all other things like tides, for example. He also predicted the tides and all the other natural phenomena that we see due to gravity using his inverse square law force. At the same time, he invented the modern form of classical mechanics, because in the school days, we all learn about the three laws of Newton's, the Newton's law 1, 2, and 3, and all these laws were actually invented by him. Even though in modern language, when you are learning Lagrangian mechanics, Hamiltonian dynamics, for example, it's a much more easier to cast them in the language of Lagrange and Hamilton. But to start with, Newton was the main inventor of the classical mechanics. Similarly, Newton had enormous contribution in optics as well. So he also built a telescope. Galileo built a refracting telescope. Newton built a reflecting telescope. And currently, all the telescopes that are operational on Earth, most of them use the reflecting technology which was invented by Newton. In that way, most of the modern telescopes are actually following the principles or the strategy built up by Newton in building a telescope. Similarly, he also added the notion of color, dispersion relations, and many other things to optics. So he's really a natural philosopher, as he claims himself to be. Now, just like Galileo demolished thousands of years of knowledge about the Earth being the center of the Milky Way or center of the universe, Einstein also proved Newton to be wrong about 300 years of knowledge about the inverse square law force of gravitation, along with additional ingredients. And he is the person who discovered the special and general relativity. And in special relativity, we all know about the E equal to mc square relation. But the less known aspects of Einstein are that he founded basics of quantum physics, like the photoelectric effect. But very weirdly, when the quantum physics comes to its full bloom, starting from Schrödinger equation, its probabilistic interpretation, Einstein vehemently opposed quantum physics. And till the end of his life, he never believed that the quantum physics in the current version is actually a correct or complete theory. And he gave several paradoxes to counteract the advent of quantum physics, and they actually led to several significant understanding of the quantum world, like the Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen paradox, which have led to the idea of entanglement and Bell inequality and so on and so forth. And he also worked on Brownian motion, which has won him the photoelectric effect had won him the Nobel Prize, but he had another seminal work on Brownian motion as well. However, despite all this, his work on special and general relativity are what made him world famous. In particular, he predicted existence of gravitational waves in 1915. So these are very much like the electromagnetic waves that we see around us, but gravitational waves cannot be seen in normal eyes, and I will come back to this point in a few slides. But even though he predicted it in 1915, it was discovered as late as in 2015, only 100 years later. And whatever was discovered was in exact consonance with what Einstein had predicted in 1915. Even though there is a very interesting story associated with it, in the sense that when Einstein first wrote a paper on gravitational waves, he claimed that gravitational waves should not exist. However, there was a few mistakes in that paper, which a referee of that paper noticed, and he wrote back to Einstein saying that your paper is not correct and these equations are not at par with your results. Then Einstein realized that yes, it is indeed something wrong with his paper, but he withdrew that paper and submitted it to another journal. However, he revised the title and result, and he said that gravitational waves do exist. So if the first referee was amazed by the fame of Einstein and thought that he would not do any mistake, then Einstein's prediction would be gravitational waves do not exist. So he would have been proved wrong 100 years later, but fortunately, due to that referee, he was proved correct. And the reason that he became overnight the hero of science is because of this particular experiment. So that's what I thought I should spend a few minutes with this. So this is a bending of light. So the idea is very simple. If you have a massive object like our sun, and there is a star behind the sun, then as light passes close to the sun, due to the strong gravitational field of the sun, it slightly bends. And you can measure this bending. And this bending, as you can see from the figure, that the actual location of the object is here, over here. But since the path of the light has bent due to the strong gravitational force, it will appear to a particle or to a person who is living on Earth that the star is apparently over here. So this particular angle, which we call as the bending angle, can be measured. And this is a test of the theory of general relativity. Why? Because if Newton is correct, then this particular bending angle would be different. Einstein predicted a value for this bending angle, which is larger than the Newtonian prediction by a factor of 2. So suppose I do an observation and I get some result, which is at par with the Newtonian prediction, then I would say that Einstein is simply wrong, because the experiment is not matching with what Einstein is predicting. But on the other hand, if it matches with Einstein's prediction, then we should take Einstein's theory very seriously. And this is what happened. An English astronomer named Eddington led this observation, and it was observed during a solar eclipse in 1919, 4 years after Einstein had published his results. Here also there is a very subtle catch. So Einstein published his original results in 1914, and at that time, again, his paper had some mistakes. And his prediction was matching with the Newtonian prediction actually. Now in 1914 itself, there was an expedition. The expedition was planned to measure this particular effect. But due to the World War, that particular mission was aborted. And then a few months later, Einstein recognized that there was mistake in his earlier computation, and he rectified it. And then he got a value which is larger than the Newtonian prediction by a factor of 2. Now, if the World War had not had happened, then that particular observation or that particular mission would have obtained a value which will not match with the Einstein's theory. And then who knows what will going to happen next. But fortunately, Einstein corrected it, and his corrected value matched with the observation of the solar eclipse done in 1990. So on the left-hand side, I have given a few newspaper headlines after this was declared, like the Einstein's theory triumphs, light all askew in the heavens, and finally a book for 12 wise men, because people, general relativity was so abstract at that time that very few people could actually understand it at that particular time instead. So there were several funny stories and so on which went around. But this made Einstein famous overnight due to this particular observation. But there are several others, not just bending of light. There are several other observations which people have done maybe hundreds and more than that over time. But all of it are in consistency with what Einstein had predicted almost 100 years back. And two of the most recent are what we will discuss. So this gave you idea about how the modern gravitational physics comes into its life. First of all, Galileo argued about the sun being at the center, the masses being equal, two objects will drop at the same time. Then Newton gave his inverse square law theory of gravitation. Then Einstein modified it. And whatever we use to describe gravitational physics is Einstein's theory. There is one question which is often raised that, well, but what is the use of Einstein's theory in our daily life? Because Newton's theory seems to be doing perfectly well. The answer to this question lies in the fact that we all use our smartphones in order to navigate. In the sense, if you book an Uber, it will come to a location which you have given, and it will only come because you can track the Uber, or the Uber can track you through what we call as the GPS, or the global positioning system. Now this global positioning system is made out of various satellites, and these satellites had to keep time to very good accuracy. Otherwise, suppose you order an Uber at Belur, it may appear at Dakshineshwar because of the GPS mismatch. And this particular mismatch will happen if you do not take into account of the correction due to general relativity. So all the GPS tracking system, Google Maps, Uber, Ola, all of these things actually use Einstein's theory in order to predict where you will be, and therefore is actually an integral part of our daily life. But after all this, let us start, how do we get to black holes? So for that, I start with this particular figure, which may be familiar to some of you. So this is the birth of our universe. I mean, our universe has to born from somewhere in order for black holes or anything to form. So how the universe formed is something that none of us know about, because we cannot talk about physics at that high energy or small length scales. But we know something happened, maybe some quantum fluctuation, some quantum gravity effects, but there is nothing more than speculation at that level. Then there is this inflationary scenario. Then there is this inflationary scenario which sort of expanded the universe in an exponential manner and led it to a very huge size. And during that time scale, what happened is that the universe was very hot, and it was like the situation inside our sun. So it's a very hot plasma-like state. And at that situation, the elements are forming gradually, like hydrogen formed, helium formed, lithium formed. That particular epoch is what we call as the Big Bang nucleosynthesis. After that, there is this, you can see, right, this greenish kind of a surface. This is what people call as the surface of last scattering. What it means is that inside sun, there is the photons will scatter very vigorously, and the mean free path of the photon, which you have learned in your kinetic theory of gases, will be very small. So the mean free path of photon will be so small that it cannot travel further. But after some time, when the universe has expanded, what happens is that the mean free path suddenly becomes very large. So the photons started to stream freely without any collision. So this surface is what people call as surface of last scattering, because after that, the photons are streaming freely. And this is the surface which we observe in what we call as the cosmic microwave background radiation. This is a very important observational probe of any gravity theory at a cosmological setting or at the universe scale setting. Then gradually these hydrogen and heliums, they condense, and as they condense, they become heated, and that leads to formation of the stars. So the stars are forming at this level. And then universe gradually evolves, which is not the part of this talk. Maybe we can discuss it at a later instant, leading to the current epoch when the universe is going through an accelerated expansion. But let us not go to that. Let us talk about the stars. And let us ask, what is inside a star? So inside a star, we have hydrogen, and two hydrogen will fuse to form helium. Why we need fusion? Because any object will try to collapse under its own gravitational force, and there has to be a counterbalance to keep it there. And this counterbalance is provided by this fusion. So hydrogen are fusing to form helium, and that is generating heat, and that is causing a pressure, outward pressure, which is making the star stable. But there is only a finite amount of hydrogen. So hydrogen will gradually go to helium, then helium will start to fuse, forming carbon. Carbon will lead to oxygen, and in that manner it will reach iron. And if you have gone through your nuclear physics course, you know that in the binding energy curve, iron sits at the top. That means if you fuse to iron, you cannot generate heat. Rather, it will absorb heat from you. That means that after the core reaches iron, the fusion process stops there. So then it has an onion-like structure with hydrogen at the outermost layer, then helium, then carbon, and ultimately iron at the very end. But since fusion has stopped, there is no outward pressure which can be generated, and therefore the star starts to collapse with nothing else to prevent it. The only force or the only way to prevent it from going to zero size is some quantum effects. But these also have limitations. So that's why I have drawn here the life cycle of a star. So a star starts from a nebular system. It can be two kinds of star. One could be a very similar like our sun, which is a standard star, or it could be a very massive star. Now, if it is a standard star like sun, it will go to what we call as a red giant when its days are ending, when it is starting to go to iron and no more fusion is taking place. On the other hand, for a massive star, it will go to what we call as a red supergiant. Now, often this red giant star will shed off all the extra materials and it will settle down to what we call as a white dwarf. So how is the white dwarf stable? Not because of fusion, but because of degeneracy pressure. If you have gone through your statistical mechanics course, you will learn that there is something called degeneracy pressure, which is precisely due to Pauli's exclusion principle, that the star is so dense that you will have to push two electrons in the same quantum state if you want to compress it further. Since that is not possible, therefore quantum effects will prevent it from further collapse, and it will lead to what we call as a white dwarf. And incidentally, the mass limit, what should be the maximum mass up to which such white dwarf formation is allowed, was discovered by an Indian scientist named Chandrasekhar, and that's why this goes by the name of Chandrasekhar limit. Similarly, for the supergiant star, they actually explode, leading to supernova. The supernovas are so bright that it can actually outshine most of the stars, and they can even be visible in the daylight. And it can have two outcomes. One is the black hole, where the star has shrunk to zero size, and the other one is a neutron star, again held by the quantum degeneracy pressure. So therefore, broadly speaking, there are other possibilities, but there are three main categories: white dwarf for small mass object, neutron star for medium mass object, and for very massive object, which is more or less inevitably a black hole. So a black hole means that nothing comes out of it because the star has shrunk and its gravitational pull is so strong that nothing, even light, can escape from that particular object, leading to the name black hole. So this is how black holes are described in general relativity. So first one is what people call as a Schwarzschild black hole, because as you know, in special relativity, we talk about line elements, which is minus dt square plus dx square plus dy square plus dz square. This is a slight generalization of that, and here the parameter m stands for the mass of the black hole. Similarly, you can have charges of the black hole. This goes by the name of Dresden-Nostrom. Now again, a very interesting story over here. In 1915, when Einstein first gave his theory, he also gave his famous Einstein's equations. So Einstein's equations are a set of 10 nonlinear, partial, coupled differential equations. And it is notoriously difficult to solve them. And it took almost 100 years for people to solve it in numerical methods. But then Einstein said that it is impossible to try to obtain a solution of this equation. But it turns out that within 1 year, in 1916, Schwarzschild discovered this particular solution of Einstein's equation. And the Reisner-Nordström solution also followed within 4 or 5 years. There are also rotating black hole solutions, but these are more difficult to find, and this took 20, 30 more years to find these solutions. So nowadays, finding solution of Einstein's equation is sort of better understood thanks to very advanced numerical methods. But let us not get into all those mathematics right away. Let us talk about the observation. So, well, I have a theory that predicts a black hole, and there has to be observational evidences for black holes. So what are they? So this is an artistic picture of a black hole. So you can see the black region in the intermediate state from where nothing can escape. And there is a companion star which you cannot see over here. And the black hole, due to its very high tidal force, is stripping material from that. So these are accreting onto the black hole and thereby changing the color due to the dynamical friction. This is what people call as the accretion disk, and by studying properties of this accretion disk, one can understand the physics of black holes to a very good extent. So I will not go into the accretion disk properties, but rather I will focus more on a different perspective. So this is again a pictorial description just to orient yourselves that what happens when two such black holes are colliding, for example, which would be a very violent phenomenon. Again, this is the artist's impression. This is not captured using a telescope. Similarly, this is another setup of two black holes which are colliding into each other. As you can see that the picture, the background picture is distorted near a black hole. This is because of the bending effect that I mentioned. For Sun, the bending effect is small. That's why the bending angle is also small. But for a black hole, due to its very high gravitational force, the bending effect is extremely pronounced. So you can see there are arcs which are formed around it. And these arcs are precisely due to the bending effect. Now, next thing is, if we want to understand some object to a good extent, we have to understand it at various wavelengths. So it's the same galaxy which I have plotted, Andromeda to be precise, in various wavelengths. There is radio, then there is infrared, there is visible, ultraviolet, and finally X-ray. So as you can see, if I look at the galaxy in the radio, there is nothing at the center. It seems that the center is hollow. There is only some rings and that's it. On the other hand, if I go to infrared, it seems there is something at the center, but there is nothing in between. The intermediate region looks hollow. As you can see, these are black portions. Visible looks very different. There is many things going around, gases, stars, and so on and so forth. In ultraviolet also the shape is different. The central is very highly visible, but the spiral nature is also can be seen. But if I go to X-ray, it is extremely weird. There is no spiral, nothing. Only the central region of the galaxy can be seen in X-ray. So that means if I probe an object in different wavelengths, I get different sets of information. Similarly, for black holes, these are of course the electromagnetic spectrum. There is another recent spectrum which have come in, which is gravitational waves. So when two black holes are colliding, which is shown by these two blobs over here, again artistic impression, then you can see that as these two objects are going closer and closer, the space-time fabric on which they are living, they are itself undulating. And this causes waves, in the sense that when you throw stones on the pond water, there are ripples in the pond. That is exactly how it is happening here. There are two objects which are coming close to each other, and as a consequence, the fabric, the space-time fabric on which it lives, is itself getting modulated. And that leads to this particular wave structure, which we call as gravitational waves. To see how this works in real life, this is again a short video which will demonstrate that. Where we have two black holes which are going around each other. These are the black blobs which are characterized by the potential well, as you can see, which is very deep because of the strong gravitational pull. So they are going closer and closer to each other, as you can see from this video. and at some time they will actually merge. That means these two potentials will overlap, forming a hybrid object, and then that hybrid object will gradually throw away all the asymmetries and leading to another symmetric spherical black hole. So this is where these two potential wells are merging, and these two black holes are also merging with each other. So this is the merging of two black holes forming a single asymmetric object. And then that object sort of settles down by throwing away, and as you can see, it is again regaining its spherical shape. And all these ripples you can actually detect by using the Gravitational Wave Observatory on Earth. So this is a simulation done by this blackholes.org and several other universities. It's a collaborative effort from the LIGO to understand how gravitational waves work. So these are the three phases of gravitational wave. So this is the inspiral phase, where the two objects are coming closer to each other and emitting gravitational waves. Then this portion is the merger phase, where the objects are merging and forming that asymmetrical quantity. And finally, that asymmetrical quantity is settling to a symmetric and final state by throwing away all the asymmetries. This is known as the ring down phase. So these are the three phases of gravitational waves. The other observational tool is shadow of a black hole. So this is the fact that can we see a black hole, in the sense that black hole will appear to us as a black disk with some background illumination. Now, can we have a telescope with such a resolving power that it can actually resolve a black hole whose size is very small? So this was achieved recently by using the Earth itself as a telescope, in the sense that they used several telescopes on the Earth and used a joint distribution and joint observation in order to increase the resolution power. And as a consequence, they managed to get some images. So this image is from simulation, and the real image comes here. So the image on the left gives you the shadow of a black hole. So the black region in the middle is what actually represents the black hole. It is a sort of, you can see it's not very clear, crispy. That is precisely because of the resolution. The resolution was not good enough to get a picture better than this. But on the other hand, if you take a simulated image like this, and on top of that you superimpose all the biases and all the other details that has gone into the telescope, the observational side, you again recover an image which looks exactly like what you have observed. So the left-hand side is what is prediction from our observation. The right-hand side is the prediction from theory, and you can actually show that the theory and observations are at very good agreement with each other. So again, Einstein's theory triumphs. And this is a final result. This is again which led to the Nobel Prize. One of the Nobel Prize obtainer was a lady who actually devised and done this experiment, even though helped with many people. This is the orbit of a particular star called S2 around the central massive object in our Milky Way. So she actually observed this orbital period for 16 years. So it's a single observation which took 16 years. And in 16 years, she could actually pinpoint the orbit of this particular star. And using this orbit, she could actually compute what is the mass of this central object, and thereby concluded that this must be a black hole. This is the best ever experimental verification of a black hole before the gravitational wave and the shadow observations came in. This figure, for example, is the same object but with several stars which are revolving around it have been shown, and using their trajectory one can actually predict the mass of the central object and confirm that it's actually a black hole, because the mass is 4 million solar masses, which is impossible to achieve by any normal means other than a black hole. So this finishes the observational part. So I guess I have given you a broad overview where general relativity and black hole physics, theory and observation stands nowadays. And I don't think I have much time, so I will go through slightly quickly and finish it off in 5 minutes and then stop for questions. So let us talk about Doppler shift. So think of motion with uniform velocity in special relativity. So t goes as gamma of tau, tau is the proper time, and x is gamma v into tau. And you ask what happens to a plane wave. So a plane wave is just Doppler shifted. So the new frame has a frequency which is omega root 1 minus v by 1 plus v. While if you consider motion with constant acceleration, then the wave behaves a little weird because the frequency itself has an exponential dependence. Then if you compute the power spectrum, which is somewhat related to the Fourier transform mod square, it actually has a Planckian distribution. What it means is that if you have a plane wave and if you accelerate towards that plane wave, it will appear to you as if that wave source has a temperature and is emitting a Planckian distribution with a temperature which is related to the acceleration of this observer. Why this is important? This is important because if you take the Schwarzschild solution that I discussed earlier and go near the surface r equal to 2m, you can actually show that it is identical to that of an accelerated frame with an acceleration which is 1 over 4m. That means that black holes are actually hot because if you think of it as an accelerated object, then it will appear to you as if it is radiating and its temperature is given by 1 by 8 pi. So this is the result that Stephen Hawking derived, and this goes by the name of Hawking temperature. And this is the temperature of a black hole. This is not a classical effect because classically black holes cannot radiate. This comes from purely quantum consideration. But what are the consequences? The consequences are as follows. That suppose you take two black holes, one of mass m, the other one of mass m plus dm, and you compute the change in area of the black hole. So it is 4 pi r square. The area means the area of the horizon, which is located at 2m. So 2m plus 2dm square and 4 pi 2m square, which is nothing but 32 pi mdm. Then you can say that my change in mass is related to area over 32 pi m. If you take 8 pi m out, you get d of area over 4, which is nothing but TdS. So mass is the energy. So this is like dq or du equal to TdS because there is no pressure present here, which is nothing but the first law of thermodynamics. So you may want to say, well, then do black holes have entropy, which is proportional to the area by 4? And this is something that people always associate to, that black holes behave as thermodynamical systems with an entropy, which is given by this formula. And as you can see, this is the only formula where C, G, and H bar all come into play. That means this expression must have its origin in some form to quantum theory of gravity. Because in quantum theory of gravity, speed of light, Planck's constant, Newton's constant, as I have shown in the cube of physics diagram at the beginning, all comes into play. Therefore, you see that the classical object as black hole can actually carry information about its quantum nature and possibly about quantum gravity. And again, very interestingly, just like in the second law of thermodynamics in normal systems, here also you can show that if matter field satisfies certain conditions, then the entropy or the area of the black hole always increases. It never decreases. So the second law of thermodynamics also applies to black holes. And this uses the Raychaudhuri's equation, which, as you know, Professor Amal Kumar Raychaudhuri had derived. And this plays a very central role in the analysis of all this calculation. And this has also led to the Nobel Prize, which was obtained by Penrose last year. So therefore, the Raychaudhuri equation played a very important role, and black hole thermodynamics, black hole entropy, these all have attached to very interesting attention. Finally, as I said, this has further generalization because if you take a rotating black hole with a charge and so on, you have a much more general law, dm equal to TdS minus omega dj plus phi dq, which is very much the first law of thermodynamics. And this is not only true for black holes, but for much more general circumstances. However, there are several caveats. So black hole has formed, black hole is alive, but then it has a temperature, so it must die because it radiates energy at the expense of its own mass, so therefore it shrinks. And thus, ultimately, after a finite time, the black hole will evaporate. Then the problem would be that whatever you have thrown inside the black hole will be wiped out. And this goes by the name of laws of information, and this is a very problematic statement. In the sense, if you are in quantum mechanics, you will know that there are called unitary evolution, and unitary evolution always takes a pure state to a pure state. But for black holes, if whatever I have said is correct, it shows that this evolution will take a pure state to a mixed state. So which is against the probabilistic interpretation of quantum mechanics. So something must be going wrong somewhere. So therefore, the black hole entropy, which has all the constants C, G, and H bar, and the information loss paradox, which says that black holes radiate, they shrink, and as a consequence, their information loss, leading to non-unitary evolution. They are two biggest hint towards quantum theory of gravity. There have been several proposals like string theory, loop quantum gravity, causal sets, etc. And the main aim of all of these theories are to derive the area entropy relation from some fundamental perspective and to solve the information puzzle and to argue why such non-unitary evolution is being observed. So I will stop here. Thank you all for your attention. So if you have any questions, comments, I'll be very happy to answer them at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sumanto. Now, if you have any question, you can unmute yourself and ask.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I mean, you can ask as well. No problem.
Yeah. Okay, sir. স্যার আপনি ওই যখন যে ভিডিওটা দেখালেন মানে সিমুলেশন ভিডিওটা দুটো ব্ল্যাক হোলের তখন স্যার মানে ভিডিওটা বিভিন্ন জায়গায় বিভিন্ন কালার ছিল। আপনি স্যার ওই কালার গুলো একটু বলবেন যে মানে কি বোঝাতে চাইছে ওই কালার গুলো? হ্যাঁ, ইয়েস স্যার, এই ভিডিওটা।
হ্যাঁ, এখানে কালার গুলো হচ্ছে তোমার পোটেনশিয়াল ওয়েলের স্ট্রেংথটা। পোটেনশিয়ালটা যত ডিপ, কালারটাও হচ্ছে তত ইয়েলো থেকে রেডের দিকে যাচ্ছে। তো দেখো, পোটেনশিয়ালটা যত ডিপ হচ্ছে মানে ব্ল্যাক হোল দুটো যত কাছাকাছি আসছে তত পোটেনশিয়ালের স্ট্রেংথটা বাড়ছে এবং সেই কারণে কালারটা ক্রমশ বেশি করে রেড হয়ে উঠছে। তো আলটিমেটলি যখন ব্ল্যাক হোল দুটো একদম কাছাকাছি চলে আসবে তখন দেখো পুরোটাই কিন্তু লাল লাল মতো হয়ে যাবে। তার কারণ হচ্ছে তখন পোটেনশিয়ালটা খুব স্ট্রং হয়ে উঠবে। মানে তুমি এইখানটা দেখলেই পেয়ে যাবে, এখানটা দেখো প্রায় হলুদ আর নেই, পুরোটাই রেডিশ হয়ে গেছে, রাইট? তার কারণ হচ্ছে ওই জায়গাগুলোতে পোটেনশিয়ালের স্ট্রেংথটা খুব বেশি হয়ে গেছে। তো এখানে কালার কোডিংটা হচ্ছে সেই সেন্সে। ওকে,
থ্যাংক ইউ। ওকে, ইয়েস স্যার।
বেশ, তারপর
স্যার,
Is
it possible for a supermassive black hole to swallow a whole galaxy?
No, the problem, মানে সমস্যাটা কি দেখো, সেটা অবশ্যই সম্ভব, কারণ ব্ল্যাক হোলের কাজই হচ্ছে সবকিছুকে গিলে খেয়ে নেওয়া। ইন প্রিন্সিপাল একটা পুরো গ্যালাক্সিও সে খেয়ে নিতে পারে, কিন্তু সমস্যাটা হচ্ছে ব্ল্যাক হোলটা তো সেন্টারে বসে আছে আর তার মোশন তো সেরকম নেই, সে তো ওই জায়গাটাতেই বসে আছে। তার ফলে কি হয়, বাইরে থেকে যদি কোনো তারা বা কোনো অন্য কোনো অবজেক্ট কাছাকাছি চলে আসে তখনও সেটাকে খেয়ে নিতে পারে। কিন্তু জেনারেলি তো ডিস্টেন্স গুলো অনেক দূরে হয়, যেমন ধরো ব্ল্যাক হোল মানে আমাদের মিল্কি ওয়ের সেন্টারেও একটা ব্ল্যাক হোল আছে, কিন্তু আমাদের সূর্য তার থেকে এত দূরে রয়েছে যে সেই ব্ল্যাক হোলটার কোনো এফেক্টই আমাদের উপরে নেই। কিন্তু আমরা যদি কোনো দুর্ভাগ্যবশত সেই ব্ল্যাক হোলটার খুব কাছে চলে যাই তাহলে কিন্তু সে তখন আমাদের খেয়ে নিতে পারে। ঠিক আছে, তার ফলে ওই গ্র্যাভিটেশনাল ফোর্সটা যেহেতু মানে 1/r² এর মতো করে ওই রকমই একটা পাওয়ারে ফল অফ করে যায়, সেই জন্য ব্ল্যাক হোল থেকে একটু দূরে চলে গেলেই মানে একটু মানে বেশ খানিকটাই গেলে তখন আর ওই ব্ল্যাক হোলের এফেক্টটা তুমি বুঝতে পারবে না। ঠিক আছে, তার ফলে প্র্যাকটিক্যালি মানে এনগালফ করাটা সম্ভব না। মানে কি হয় দেখো, একটা ব্ল্যাক হোল
স্যার আমাদের সূর্য কি মানে কোনো দিনে ব্ল্যাক হোলে পরিণত হতে পারবে?
না, সূর্য হতে পারবে না, কারণ আমি বললাম না যে একটা চন্দ্রশেখর লিমিট বলে একটা লিমিট আছে। ওই লিমিটটা হচ্ছে তোমার মাস, মানে যে অরিজিনাল যে তারাটা তার মাসটা যদি 1.3 বা 1.4 এরকম একটা ভ্যালুর চেয়ে বেশি হয়, তবেই ওটা ব্ল্যাক হোল বা ওই রকম কিছুতে পরিণত হওয়ার সম্ভাবনা আছে। কিন্তু আমাদের সূর্যের মাস তো 1 সোলার মাস, ফলে সেটা তো ওই লিমিটের চেয়ে কম। তার ফলে সূর্য কোনোদিনই ব্ল্যাক হোলে পরিণত হবে না। সূর্য ওই হোয়াইট ডোয়ার্ফ যেটা আমি দেখালাম ওইটাই পরিণত।
ওকে স্যার।
আর
আচ্ছা, আমি একটা প্রশ্ন করব।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ নিশ্চয়ই।
সুরজিৎ চক্রবর্তী।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ বলুন।
আচ্ছা, আপনি তো আমাদের গ্র্যাভিটেশনাল ওয়েভের কথা বললেন। এটাতে স্পেস টাইমের অসিলেশন, অ্যাকচুয়ালি অসিলেশনটা কার হচ্ছে? মানে স্পেস টাইম কি তার নিজের একটা ডায়নামিক্স আছে, মানে স্পেস টাইম অসিলেট করছে?
হ্যাঁ,
এটা কনসিভ করাটা একটু ডিফিকাল্ট। মানে আমরা নিউটনিয়ান মানে হ্যাঁ ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ড হিসেবে ভাবি স্পেস টাইমকে, কিন্তু এখানে স্পেস টাইম অসিলেশন এইটা, ফর এক্সাম্পল হোয়াট উইল বি দ্য এফেক্ট অফ দিস ওয়েভ অন সে ক্লকস অন আর্থ when these gravitational waves have been detected?
ঠিক।
তো
হ্যাঁ, আমি আসছি সেটা। মানে আমি ধরুন আপনাকে এই উত্তরটা আগে দিই যে প্রথম কথা হচ্ছে স্পেস টাইমটাকে আপনি কিভাবে ভিজুয়ালাইজ করবেন। তা বেসিক আইডিয়াটা হচ্ছে আপনি একটা খুব ধরুন শক্ত চাদর, মানে ধরুন একটা চাদর নিলেন, নিয়ে চারটে কোনা আপনারা চারজন খুব টাইট করে ধরে রাখলেন যাতে চাদরটা প্লেন থাকে। এবার চাদরের ওপরে যদি আপনি গোটা 2-3 বল ফেলে দেন, তাহলে দেখবেন যে চাদরটা কিছু কিছু জায়গায় ডিপ হয়ে গেল বলগুলোর ওজনের কারণে। এবার আপনি চাদরটাকে অ্যাকচুয়ালি ভাবতে পারেন যে এটা হচ্ছে স্পেস টাইম, এবং এই যে বলগুলোর ফেলার ফলে যে ডিপ হয়ে গেল এটাই হচ্ছে গ্র্যাভিটেশনাল পোটেনশিয়াল হিসেবে আপনি দেখতে পাচ্ছেন। এবার যদি আপনি দুটো বলকে ওরকম কাছাকাছি আনেন যাতে ওরা একটা আরেকটার চারদিকে ঘুরছে, তখন সেইটা এই চাদরটার উপরে যেন একটা রিপলের মতো চলে যাচ্ছে, সেইটাকেই আপনি ডিটেক্ট করছেন। এবার কিভাবে ডিটেক্ট করবেন? লাইগোতে যেটা করা হয় সেটা হচ্ছে আপনার একটা ইন্টারফেরোমিটার থাকে। ইন্টারফেরোমিটারের আইডিয়াটা হচ্ছে আপনার দুটো আর্ম থাকবে যারা 90 ডিগ্রিতে রয়েছে। এবার দুটো আর্মের মধ্যে যদি একটা লেন্থ ডিফারেন্স হয় তাহলে আপনি একটা ইন্টারফারেন্স প্যাটার্ন দেখতে পাবেন। এবার লাইগোতে যেটা করা হয় যে এই যে ওয়েভটা যখন পাস করছে তখন এ কি করে, তখন এ একটা লেন্থকে ছোট করে দেয়, একটা সাইডের লেন্থকে বড় করে দেয়। একই এফেক্ট ক্লকের ক্ষেত্রেও হয়, আমি এখানে লেন্থের ক্ষেত্রে বলছি। তার ফলে একটা সাইডে মানে গ্র্যাভিটেশনাল ওয়েভ পাস করার আগে দুটো লেন্থ একই ছিল, কিন্তু গ্র্যাভিটেশনাল ওয়েভ পাস করবার ফলে কি হলো, দুটো আর্মের লেন্থ ডিফারেন্ট হয়ে গেল। তার ফলে আপনি একটা হঠাৎ করে ইন্টারফারেন্স প্যাটার্ন স্ক্রিনে দেখতে পেলেন, যেটা আগে ছিল না। তার থেকে আপনি বললেন যে তার মানে নিশ্চয়ই একটা গ্র্যাভিটেশনাল ওয়েভ পাস করেছে, যে কারণে আমার এই দুটো আর্মের লেন্থের মধ্যে একটা ডিফারেন্স তৈরি হয়।
আচ্ছা, তা এই লেন্থ দুটো মানে একই সঙ্গে দুটোই বাড়ছে দুটোই কমছে এরকম হতে পারে না?
না, ওই কারণেই আপনার ওই 90 ডিগ্রিতে করে রাখা, একটা কমবে একটা বাড়বে।
আচ্ছা, মানে এটাকে অর্থোগোনাল করে নেওয়া হয়।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, মানে এখানেও আপনার কিছু পোলারাইজেশন আছে, তো এমন ভাবে করা হয় যে একটা পোলারাইজেশন কমাবে একটা বাড়াবে, যাতে দুটোর এফেক্ট কখনো নালিফাই না করতে পারে।
আচ্ছা, আপনি ওই যে মানে চাদরের এক্সাম্পলটা দিলেন একটা গ্র্যাভিটেটিং অবজেক্ট, ওইটাতে স্পেসটা অসিলেট করতে বোঝা যায়, কিন্তু টাইমটা ঠিক মানে
মানে
সেটাই মুশকিল হয় আর কি। মানে অন্তত ছাত্রছাত্রীদের, অবশ্য আমিও বুঝি না টাইমটা, ওইটার ওটা অ্যাকচুয়ালি বেসিক্যালি আমরা একটা স্পেসের অসিলেশন দেখছি।
এটার কারণ হচ্ছে যে আমরা আর কি সবসময় টাইম আর স্পেসকে নিউটনিয়ান থিওরিতে তো আলাদা ভাবে
সেটাই হ্যাঁ।
আপনি ধরুন আইনস্টাইনের থিওরি স্পেশাল রিলেটিভিটি ধরুন না, স্পেশাল রিলেটিভিটিতেই কিন্তু আপনার যখন সাইমালটেনিটি যখন পড়ানো হয় তখন দেখবেন যে টাইম আর স্পেস কিন্তু আপনি ওরকম ভাবে আলাদা করতে পারছেন না, দুটো কিন্তু একসাথেই আপনার থিওরিতে চলে আসছে। এবার সেই কারণে স্পেস আর টাইম আপনি ওরকম আলাদা ভাবে ভাববেন না, মানে স্পেসে যা হতে পারে টাইমেও তাই হতে পারে, দুটোর মধ্যে কোনো ডিফারেন্স নেই। মানে ধরুন লেন্থ কন্ট্রাকশনও যেমন হয়, টাইম ডাইলেশনটাও তো একটা রিয়েল ফেনোমেনন।
সেটা ঠিক।
এবার সেই হিসেবে
ওখানে স্পেশাল রিলেটিভিটিতেও কিন্তু মানে স্পেস টাইমটা একটা সর্ট অফ ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ড, মানে ওটা
হ্যাঁ অবশ্যই তাই, কিন্তু জেনারেল
বিষয়টা হচ্ছে ওখানে, মানে ওই স্পেস টাইমের অসিলেশনটা ইজ টেকিং পার্ট ইন দ্য হোল গেম, এটাই হচ্ছে ইন্টারেস্টিং।
অবশ্যই অবশ্যই
বোঝাটা সত্যি। আচ্ছা, আরেকটা জিনিস আমি জিজ্ঞেস করছি, আপনি ওই মানে হকিং রেডিয়েশনটার আগে আপনি একটা, সেইটা আমি ঠিক ধরতে পারিনি, মানে একজন অ্যাক্সিলারেটেড মানে ফ্রেম, সেটা একটা কি রেডিয়েশন দেখতে পাচ্ছে, এটা এটা কি কি করে এটা ফিজিক্যালি আসছে? হ্যাঁ, এটা একটু আরেকবার একটু আমি ধরতে পারিনি তাড়াতাড়িতে।
নিশ্চয়ই এটার মানেটা হচ্ছে, ধরুন আপনি আমি আপনাকে প্রেমাইসটা বলি, আইডিয়াটা হচ্ছে যে আপনি যখন কোয়ান্টাম ফিল্ড থিওরি করেন তখন আমরা কি করি, আমরা একটা ফিল্ডকে তার ফুরিয়ার মোডে এক্সপ্যান্ড করি।
ঠিক,
ফুরিয়ার মোডে এক্সপ্যান্ড করা মানে আমি অ্যাকচুয়ালি তাকে প্লেন ওয়েভ বেসিসে এক্সপ্যান্ড করছি, যাতে প্রত্যেকটা মোডই হচ্ছে e⁻⁻i⁻t প্লাস ik ডট x।
ঠিক,
এবার আমরা যখন লোরেন্স ট্রান্সফরমেশন করছি, তার মানে হচ্ছে আমরা অ্যাকচুয়ালি আরেকটা ফ্রেমে যাচ্ছি যেটা আমাদের রেসপেক্টে ইউনিফর্ম ভেলোসিটিতে মুভ করছে। কিন্তু আমি যদি এইটাকেই পৃথিবী আর চাঁদের রেসপেক্টে দেখি, তাহলে আমরা তো আর ইউনিফর্ম ভেলোসিটিতে নেই, তার কারণ আমাদের কোনো ফ্রেমটাই ইনার্শিয়াল ফ্রেম নয়।
ওকে,
তাহলে আমরা যদি নন ইনার্শিয়াল ফ্রেমে গিয়ে কোয়ান্টাম ফিল্ড থিওরি করতে চাই, তাহলে আমরা কি দেখব?
মানে ওটাকে ইনার্শিয়াল করতে হলে আমাকে একটা গ্র্যাভিটেশনাল ফিল্ড আনতে হবে।
হ্যাঁ, মানে নন ইনার্শিয়াল ফিজিক্স মানেই হচ্ছে গ্র্যাভিটেশনাল ফিল্ড। সেটাকে আমি মানে সব সময় নয়, কিন্তু সেটাকে আমি একটা অ্যাপ্রক্সিমেট সেন্সে একটা অ্যাক্সেলারেটেড ফ্রেম হিসেবে ভাবছি। দিয়ে আমি বুঝতে চাইছি যে আমার যদি একটা প্লেন ওয়েভ থাকে আর আমি যদি একটা অ্যাক্সেলারেটেড ফ্রেমে যাই, তাহলে আমি সেই প্লেন ওয়েভটাকে কিরকম দেখব?
বেশ,
তার উত্তরটা হচ্ছে, ধরুন একটা প্লেন ওয়েভ রয়েছে, মানে ধরুন একটা ট্রেন রয়েছে যার সামনে একটা আলো রয়েছে, আপনি উল্টো দিক থেকে কনস্ট্যান্ট অ্যাক্সেলারেশন নিয়ে ওই ট্রেনটার দিকে ছুটে যাচ্ছে, তাহলে আপনি দেখতে পাবেন যে ওই যে ওয়েভটা, যেটা প্লেন ওয়েভ হওয়ার কথা ছিল, সেটা আপনার মনে হচ্ছে যেন একটা মানে একটা গরম অবজেক্ট যার ডিস্ট্রিবিউশনটা হচ্ছে প্ল্যাঙ্কিয়ান ফ্রিকোয়েন্সি।
এই জায়গাটাই বুঝতে ধরতে পারি, এইটা কি এই যে অঙ্কটা কষা আছে এইটা থেকে, মানে ফিজিক্যাল ফিল্ডটা কি হঠাৎ একটা মানে প্ল্যাঙ্কিয়ান এটা আসলো, একটা অ্যাক্সিলারেটেড ফ্রেম গোয়িং টুয়ার্ডস গ্র্যাভিটেটিং মানে একটা স্টারের দিকে, এই যে সেন্স অফ,
মানে এটা হচ্ছে যে কোনো ক্ষেত্রে, মানে যে কোনো একটা সোর্স অফ প্লেন ওয়েভ যদি হয়, এটা কারণ হচ্ছে আপনার এখান থেকে আসছে, যে আমরা জানি যে কোয়ান্টাম ফিল্ড থিওরিতে ভ্যাকুয়াম স্টেট বলে যেটাকে আমরা বলি, ভ্যাকুয়াম স্টেট আমরা একটা ডিফাইন করি না। ধরুন আমরা যখন কোয়ান্টাম মেকানিক্সে হারমোনিক অসিলেটর বলি, তখন একটা ভ্যাকুয়াম স্টেট থাকে।
ঠিক,
এবার ভ্যাকুয়াম স্টেটটা লোরেন্স ট্রান্সফরমেশনের আন্ডারে ইনভেরিয়েন্ট থাকে। তার মানে আমি যদি দুটো ফ্রেম থেকে দেখি যাদের একটা রিলেটিভ মোশন আছে উইথ কনস্ট্যান্ট ভেলোসিটি, দুটোই কিন্তু এই ভ্যাকুয়ামটাকেই ভ্যাকুয়াম হিসেবে ট্রিট করবে। কিন্তু এই স্টেটমেন্টটা অ্যাক্সেলারেটেড ফ্রেমের ক্ষেত্রে সত্যি নয়। অর্থাৎ আমি আর আপনি, আমাদের মধ্যে যদি একটা অ্যাক্সেলারেশন থাকে, তাহলে আপনি সেটাকে ভ্যাকুয়াম বলবেন, আমি সেটাকে ভ্যাকুয়াম বলবো না। তার ফলেই কিন্তু এই রেজাল্টগুলো সব আসে। এটা মোস্টলি হচ্ছে যে আমাদের, এটার মেন কারণ হচ্ছে আমাদের কোয়ান্টাম ফিল্ড থিওরিটা আমরা তৈরি করেছি এভাবে যাতে সেটা লোরেন্স সিমেট্রিটাকে রেসপেক্ট করে। কিন্তু আমরা যে মুহূর্তে গ্র্যাভিটি আনবো, তখন তো লোরেন্স সিমেট্রি তার একটা সাব ক্লাস হয়ে যাবে, তখন আমার সিমেট্রি প্রুফটা হবে জেনারেল কোঅর্ডিনেট ট্রান্সফরমেশন। তার আন্ডারে কিন্তু কোয়ান্টাম ফিল্ড থিওরির এই ভ্যাকুয়াম সিমেট্রি, প্লেন ওয়েভের প্রপার্টি, এইগুলো থাকে না। তো তখন এই ধরনের অদ্ভুত অদ্ভুত প্রপার্টি গুলো চলে আসে।
ও, তার মানে মানে ক্রাক্স অফ দ্য থিং ইজ অ্যাক্সিলারেটেড ফ্রেম থেকে ভ্যাকুয়াম ইজ নন ইনভ্যারিয়েন্ট।
এক্স্যাক্টলি।
ওকে, আচ্ছা, বাবা, এটার মানে গাণিতিক, এটা কি এই স্লাইডটাতে আছে? মানে
হ্যাঁ, মানে এটা আমি আপনাকে খুব ব্রিফলি বলেছি, এটাকে আরো ডিটেলসে যদি চান, মানে সেগুলো বেশ কিছু বই আছে যেগুলোতে এগুলো ডিসকাস করা থাকে। মানে আপনি যে কোনো বই যেগুলো কোয়ান্টাম ফিল্ড থিওরি ইন কার্ভড স্পেস টাইম নিয়ে ডিল করে, তারা সবাই এই এফেক্টটাকে বলা হয় আনরু এফেক্ট।
ও আচ্ছা আচ্ছা আচ্ছা, ঠিক আছে, এই পর্যন্ত বুঝলাম। এবার হচ্ছে মানে এবার আমি মানে এই হকিং রেডিয়েশনটা আপনি আসলেন কি করে, মানে সেইটা যদি আরেকবার একটু বলেন।
এবারে এখান থেকে আমি যেটা দেখলাম যে আমার যদি একটা কনস্ট্যান্ট অ্যাক্সেলারেশন নিয়ে যদি মোশন হয়, সেখান থেকে আমি এরকম একটা প্ল্যাঙ্কিয়ান ডিস্ট্রিবিউশন পাচ্ছি।
বেশ,
এবারে আমি যেটা দেখাইনি এখানে সেটা হচ্ছে যে আপনি যদি এই r=2m সারফেসটার কাছে যান, তাহলে আপনি দেখাতে পারবেন যে সেই যে মেট্রিকটা যেটা আপনি পান স্পেস টাইম, যেরকম স্পেশাল রিলেটিভিটিতে -dt² + dx² + dy² + dz² আছে, সেই মেট্রিকটা একটা অ্যাক্সেলারেটেড ফ্রেমের মেট্রিকের সাথে সমান উইথ অ্যান অ্যাক্সেলারেশন যেটা হচ্ছে 1/4m।
আচ্ছা,
এবার আমরা আগেই দেখেছি যদি অ্যাক্সেলারেশন হয় তাহলে আমরা একটা টেম্পারেচার পাচ্ছি যেটা হচ্ছে a/2π। তাহলে এখানে যেহেতু অ্যাক্সেলারেশনটা হচ্ছে 1/4m, তাহলে আমি একটা টেম্পারেচার পাবো যেটা হচ্ছে 1/8πm। এইটাই হচ্ছে হকিং এর টেম্পারেচার। মানে হকিং এর ডেরিভেশনটা অন্যরকম ছিল, কিন্তু সেটা তো আর এখানে বলা সম্ভব নয়। আমি সেই জন্য জাস্ট অ্যাক্সেলারেটেড ফ্রেমের আইডিয়াটা ইউজ করে এখানে
আচ্ছা, টেম্পারেচার মানে হচ্ছে রেডিয়েট করবে এবং তারপর এক সময় শেষ হয়ে যাবে, অল ইনফরমেশন প্যারাডক্স এগুলো সব অ্যাপিয়ার করবে। তা এই ইনফরমেশন প্যারাডক্সের কি রেজলিউশন হয়েছে আজ পর্যন্ত? আমি জানি না। হ্যাঁ, সরি,
হয়নি। মানে অনেক রকম লোকজনের অনেক বক্তব্য আছে, কিন্তু মানে আমি ধরুন আপনার রেজলিউশনটা বিশ্বাস করি না, আপনার রেজলিউশন ভুল দেখাতে পারি, আপনি আবার আমার রেজলিউশনটাই কিছু লুপহোল বার করতে পারেন। এইরকম কোনো ইউনিক কনসেনসাস নেই। একজন তাদের মতো করে কিছু রেজলিউশন দেওয়ার চেষ্টা করে, কিন্তু তাদের সবারই কিছু প্রোজ আর কনস আছে।
আচ্ছা, anyway, thank you very much. I mean, elucidating all these points. Thank you.
Okay, can I ask one question?
Yeah, sure.
You have said black hole shadow. I mean, what it is a physical quantity, black hole shadow? I mean, there are lots of paper going on black hole shadow.
It is. It's a physical quantity. So the idea is that suppose you have a black hole, and on the background of the black hole there are some light source, maybe some galaxy or something. So the point is then how will the black hole appear to you? So that is what this picture is showing. So there is a light ring kind of a structure, while inside there is a black region. Now the radius or this is a circle-like structure. So this circle is what people call as the black hole shadow. It's not exactly the event horizon, but it's a nearby that event horizon, related to the photon sphere or some other thing. But it's a real quantity. This is something you can measure. Does this answer your question? Or
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I understand. Okay, if is there any question? Any more question? Okay, if there is no more question, then let's thank our speaker and Meghanko Roy Boshonia, our colleague. He will give the vote of thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. This is my privilege to extend gratitude to Dr. Sumanto Chakraborty, IAS, for his motivational, important, insightful, and this rich lecture. I thank you, sir, on behalf of the Department of Physics, Ramakrishna Mission Vidya Mandira, for your inspirational lecture.
Thank you.
In this century, black hole physics will be the key to open the door of universe, I think. And this year, Dr. Penrose and two other renowned physicists awarded Nobel Prize on black hole. I would be grateful to you, sir, if our student will benefit from this lecture, and I am sure they will. I thank you, the people behind this program, to make successful. Once more, I thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks to all for attending, and thanks for the invitation as well.
Okay, then now we are closing this program.